than all our sin. Dark is a
again. This is lesson number 4. The overall outline, and I'm going to do this every time because we're kind of micro digging into, just a few verses or part of a chapter. Last week we didn't get very far into chapter 2. Today we will, or this evening, finish chapter 2. Hopefully, if I'll try to not stop and drag this out. But tonight we're going to be looking at the sons of Eli. Oh my, what a story. If you've never read or studied about the sons of Eli, you're going to get blown away tonight. There's a lot of scripture that catches a lot of people off guard. 1 Samuel 2 and verse 12. It's not verse 12, it's verse 1. Not even verse 1 and 2, it's just verse 1. It is 2, verse 12. That's right. I'm sorry. I'm thinking it was going back to the first part of the chapter. It's not. It is verse 12. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. That's just ugly. I've had to look at my notes twice before I realized we're going to be looking at verse 12 all the way to verse 36. That's why I was thinking for some reason back again, we're starting at the beginning of the chapter. I'm getting old and senile, so it doesn't help a lot of times. We're going to kind of follow with and look at the idea, the way that I've organized the rest of this chapter. First of all, looking at the corruption. You'll see that. It's just horrible. Then we'll look at the contrast. This will kind of split up, even though there's several verses that deal with Samuel. We're going to also look at, excuse me, 2 other verses that are not in connection that will also give you a contrast. Then we'll look at the complicity. Eli, though you'll see him rebuke his sons, he fell quite short of his fatherly responsibilities and his high priestly responsibilities. Lastly, we'll look at the confirmation. Confirmation being that the sons of Eli were the sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord, and there was a cost for that. They were all rejected. When we start looking at the corruption, first of all, from verse 12 to verse 17, we'll notice shameless ministers and then a spoiled ministry. Shameless ministers. Now, Hophni and Phinehas were called by God sons of Belial. It's interesting when you just look at the use of that, you'll find sons of Belial, children of Belial, and just Belial. The idea, it means worthless, ungodly, wicked, lawless, unrestrained. Sons of Belial has to do with, when they use that word, it refers to the character of the individual. It's used several times in the Old Testament, just saying the sons of Belial. Belial is used both in the Old and the New Testament, but only once in the New. The word Belial itself is found some 27 times in the Old Testament. It's also translated evil, wicked, naughty, and ungodly. In each case where it describes men, it is describing them as ones who are controlled only by their lusts, or if you will, their baser instincts. These particular sons of Belial, and you'll see it elsewhere, have no morals and they don't care. They don't care who knows. You see it, and I won't show you all the verse, but it's used several times, but you'll see it in Judges 19 and verse 22 where it talks about these men who came and they were wanting the men in their in this house. It says, now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, beset the house round about and beat at the door and spake to the master and said, bring him out. We want him. We want to know him. They were, again, involved in trying to satisfy their baser instincts, the lust of the flesh. In 2 Samuel 23 and 6, it talks about the sons of Belial shall be all of them as thorns thrust away because they cannot be taken with hands. You ever try to grab a thorn bush, a rose bush that's got a lot of thorns on it? You don't do it. And that's the way these sons of Belial. All in 1 Kings chapter 21 and verse 10. This is the story having to do with Naboth, I believe. And it set two men, sons of Belial, before him, talking about what they did to bear witness against him, saying, thou didst blaspheme God and the king. And what did they do? They ended up carrying him out and stoning him to kill him. Children of Belial is used some 15 times. In Deuteronomy 13, it's made mention of. So you've got the sons of Belial and the children of Belial, and the whole idea, again, that one in Deuteronomy 13 and 13 is the very first use of that word Belial in the Bible, and it seems to refer to them as children who were without a yoke. In other words, they disregard the yoke of the law. They see it as a yoke, and they're not about to tolerate it. They have thrown off, in fact, John Gill said this about it, they have thrown off the yoke of God's law. I think it goes further. It explains again their character. These children of Belial, these men of Belial, these sons of Belial are those who refuse the yoke of God. They will not allow the yoke to be put upon them. A lot of people don't want to hear the Bible preached. Why not? Because it puts a yoke on them. And they think Christianity is restrictive and then I can't have fun. They don't want any rules. They don't want any laws. They don't want any restrictions. The sons of Belial, the children of Belial, are those who are controlled only by their own unbridled lusts and in whatever direction it leads them. They are, as the word kind of gives you, they're worthless as far as any good being within them. When Ahab lusted after Naboth's vineyard, those two children of Belial were sent to bear false witness against Naboth by Jezebel so they could acquire his land. And of course, he was taken out and stoned without further due process. The word Belial is found one time in the book of Corinthians, in the second letter to them. It says, what concord or what agreement hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? The emphasis here is really representative of an attitude, again, of throwing off the yoke. They don't want the yoke of the law. In this case, it was expressing the corruption of unbelievers, of pagans, who do not submit to the rule of Christ and will have none of it. They want you to join their faith. We've got a lot of that today. But they don't want you and your laws. You bring the yoke of God and they don't want it. This is lawlessness, and it's contrary to Christ. There is no harmony. There is no agreement with Christ. Christ goes on and says in that book of Corinth that we are to come out from among them. We are to be separated from them. We are not to touch the unclean. It's pretty clear. We're to have nothing to do with the sons of Belial. Eli's son, Hophni and Phinehas, were worthless. They were wicked. They were lawless. They were uncontrollable. They were unclean. They were unrestrained by anything other than their own lust and imagination. In fact, God calls them ignorant. Look at that verse back up there at 12. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They were ignorant. They knew not the Lord. They chose not to know the Lord. They would not be constrained by any knowledge of the Lord or any example. And of course, what do we see? The rest of their portion, the corruption of the verses follow suit. It tells you how corrupt they were. Hophni and Phinehas were worthless, wicked, lawless, uncontrollable, unclean, and unrestrained men. The only thing that restrained them was their imagination of their wicked hearts. Now, I mentioned to you that it would not only talk about as shameless ministers. I mean, they didn't hide it. And you'll see this. They spoiled the ministry. That's what they did. Look with me, and we're going to follow suit and with the rest of the scriptures here. It says, and the priest's custom. That's not a good custom. They were setting aside the law and the practice of the way that Moses had given it to them. And the priest's custom was with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came. That means they had corrupted the priesthood and the other priests that were there. And they came while the flesh was in seething or boiling, with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand. And he struck it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took for himself. Now, they're already cooking that. That was for the family. We're talking about here, this was the peace offering. And there was a portion for the Lord, a portion for the priest, and a portion for the offerer. And they could eat it with their family. The priests were going over and getting parts of the Lord's and parts of the offerer too. They had, and when you look at that, they had a corrupt custom, and their custom was completely corrupt. You look back up there, it says, in the priest's custom with the people. And verse 14 as well, when it says that he stuck into the pan or kettle or cauldron, so that they did this in Shiloh unto all the Israelites. This was their custom. This is how they treated everyone. Their custom was against the law of God. They would not be constrained by what God commanded. Instead of trusting God, they would make sure that they got the best of the meat first before anyone else did. They made up their own rules. Again, by figuring out the offerings, even though it doesn't say it's the peace offering, you can pretty much figure that's the one that they were polluting the process. Again, the peace offering had a specific portion of the offering that went to the Lord, a portion that went to the priest, and a portion to the one who brought the offering. But Phinehas and Hophni changed the rules. And people could not come except they came their way. They controlled the process. While the meat was being boiled, they put in their big old hooks. And instead of trusting the Lord, they made sure, again, they put in a big old three-prong hook. They were supposed to depend upon the Lord and trust in whatever came out. They were not only doing that. If you look what the people said there, and you can see it, but Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child girded with a linen ephod. Let me give you one other thing before we get into that too much with this corrupt custom and the complete corrupt custom that they had. They took what did not belong to them. I guess I don't have it up there, but in chapter 2, verse 15, I thought I did. Let me look. Nope, it's not there. So let me stick with this one and read you verse 15. Also, before they burnt the fat, that's the Lord's portion, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, give flesh to roast for the peace, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. In other words, I want to barbecue my own meat. I don't want boiled meat. That's what they were doing. I don't want the boiled meat. I want the meat raw before you. No, that goes to the Lord. In fact, the person might say, hey, I'm willing to lose my portion, but the portion which belongs to the Lord should be burnt first. Verse 16, if any man said unto him, let them not fail to burn the fat presently or right now, and then take as much as thy soul desireth. That was after, again, take my portion, whatever, but not the Lord's. Here was the rule. Then they would answer him, nay, but thou shalt give it me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Imagine that. Hey, you give me your offering, and you give it to me, and if you don't give it to me, I'll take it by force. That's what they were saying. They forced people to comply to their law. That's the example of the sons of Belial, how that they had corrupted the whole custom of the offering, and it was a complete corruption. So much so that verse 17 says this, wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for men abhorred the offering of the Lord. I don't know why I missed all these verses. They're supposed to be in there, but they're not. They abhorred it. In other words, they condemned, they despised the offering. I'm not going to church. That preacher's a heretic. That's what was going on. I don't even want to go and bring my offering because those people have corrupted, those men have corrupted the whole sacrificial system for their benefit. They're getting rich off of us. They then didn't want to worship the Lord. Isn't that sad? Their theft of what belonged to the Lord was open and obvious. Their corrupt practice and their corrupt character caused the people to see fault in the whole system. These sons of Belial changed the message of the gospel. You can't change the message of God's word. They're changing it, folks. You know what the quickest, the highest rated sermon that was preached recently on our YouTube channel was, besides the older ones, was one I preached called The Woke Church. I'm sure, though, that when people listen to it, it's not what they thought. That woke church needed to be woke up and get busy preaching the gospel. But you know, they had, I don't know if you've already seen it, it was on the news. Pat showed me a little clip of the woke church where this woman is reading the Sparkle Creed. You talk about woke. They talk about God being in the plural and he's a binary God or some kind of strange stuff that they went on, and it was sickening. That's not Christianity. That's pagan, if anything. That's heresy. Just like we got done reading with these guys. Then I want to look at the contrast. But Samuel ministered before the Lord. Here he is but a child, girded with a linen ephod. In contrast from verse 18 to verse 21, and also pick up verse 36, and we'll pick another one up as well. Samuel did minister before Eli in verse 11. But here it says Samuel did minister unto the Lord. You've gotten a little more advanced. He was still a child, but he was already growing in the ministry. The contrast is there in his character and the character of the sons of Eli. His contrast is in his custom. He ministered before the Lord and before Eli. They ministered unto themselves. His family, of course, remained faithful. Verse 19, we read, moreover, his mother made him a little coat and brought it from year to year. It's not the coat that's important. Notice they came back every year, though the system was corrupt. It didn't stop them from worshiping. You hear what I'm saying? How many people will get upset about something going, I'm not going to church anymore. I'm not going to go worship God. Well, what are you going to do? Stay at home? They didn't. Didn't we just read how corrupt the ministry had gotten? And yet they came year after year, and they ministered a gift to their son. Elkanah and Hannah continued to bring their yearly sacrifice. They saw the corruption, but they remained faithful. You know, even in that corruption, we see that God raised up a woman. Ladies, God raised up a woman. And it was that woman who then raised up a young child, and that child would change the nature of worship in their nation, and it would change the whole nation. Eli, I think, already began to see the worth of this young man. He knew that God's hand was upon him. Because what did he do? Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife. It said, the Lord give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord. And they went to their own home. And the Lord visited Hannah so that she conceived and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord. That's why I said last week how prophetic Hannah's prayer was. Now, Eli, when we start looking at the complicity, Eli was complicit in his son's sin. Let's look at it from verse 22 to 25. Now Eli was very old. Some say that he was about 90 about this time. Well, I mean, that's as good excuse as any, but apparently his hearing wasn't bad. Because even though he was old, he heard all that his sons did unto Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. My goodness, a woman coming to worship the Lord, and that's how you abuse the whole system of worship? Wonder how they managed that. How horrible of them. He heard. Verse 23, and he said unto them, why do ye such things? For I hear, why do you? Because we can get away with it. Nobody's stopping us. You're not saying anything, not until now. I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. You know, when he finally said something is when the people got so full of it, they finally talked to Eli. Your sons have corrupted the ministry. Your sons have corrupted everything. Now that he hears about it enough, he finally says something to them. Was he blind? Had he removed himself from the daily life and instruction of the priest? I believe he had. The manner and system of offerings had become completely corrupt. And yet how is it that Eli saw nothing? Oh, I think he saw it, and he benefited from it. You know why? Because Eli was very fat. And what did we read about that meat? Man, he could have a barbecue every weekend of some of the best prime beef in the country. He benefited from it, the corruption. And a lot of people will turn their heads when they are benefited. This rebuke was not enough. Verse 24, nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear. Ye make the Lord's people to transgress. He even says, if one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat for him? You can't do it because you're wicked and vile. You know, he's saying, you're not a mediator. You can't be a mediator between God and man. You're not a type of Christ. You're not a fit priest. Notwithstanding, they hearken not unto the voice of their father. Because the Lord would slay them. He tried to reason with them by showing them their error and how they could not function in their priestly duties because of their lifestyle and what they did. You know, a preacher is one who stands in the gap for the sinner. We're not the mediator, but we do stand in the gap for the sinners. We pray and we preach. That last statement to me is the saddest of all. Because the Lord would slay them. I think there's a sound that's there that's reminiscent of Romans chapter 1 and verse 26, where it says, for this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. They were untouched by their own wickedness. They held the truth of God in unrighteousness, and God gave them up. There was no hope. No hope of recovery for them. That's why I say that's pretty sad. Their course is set. Here again in verse 26, though, and the next verse, in verse 26 of chapter 2 of 1 Samuel, we see the contrast between Eli's sons and the child Samuel. Verse 26, and the child Samuel grew on. Notice the difference. Samuel grew and was in favor both with the Lord and also with men. Instead of being wicked and awaiting the destroying, wrathful hand of God, Samuel grew in favor with God. He grew in grace. Instead of being evil spoken of, he was very well spoken of. And the people, you'll see it when he died, they are moved. They are saddened. They grieve. The next section is the confirmation. Confirmation of their wickedness and the confirmation from the Lord. Where this next section again had to be the worst news Eli could ever hear, besides of what he will hear from Samuel a little bit later. One of the prophets came to Eli and rehearsed how that the grace of God had been upon his house but now it will be removed forever. God told him that he had been part of the chosen tribe and chosen family, but now the tribe will remain chosen, but his family will be rejected. God said in verse 29, "Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and at mine offering?" Why do you just kick it away? Here's the rules, here's the regulation. You kick at it, which I've commanded in my habitation. And what do? You honor your sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel, my people. You're taking the best. The best belongs to the Lord. The prophet was pretty clear. And in verse 31, "Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm, and the arm of thy father's house, that there shall not be an old man in thine house." In other words, no one will survive this judgment upon the house of Eli. Eli was not satisfied with the provisions that God had given him. So therefore he would not be satisfied with either Eli or his sons. Both, of course, would die in one day. Verse 34, "And this shall be a sign unto thee." So in other words, Eli's going to hear it. Word's going to come to him that thy two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, in one day they shall both of them die. And they did. In fact, it also talks about, in verse 36, how that if any of his house remains in the ministry, in the Levitical priesthood, notice what it says, "And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left in thine house shall come and crouch, beg to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and say, Put me, I pray thee, into one of the priest's office, that I may eat a piece of bread." Well, they did sell their souls for what they could get out of it, but now they won't be able to even do that. Later on, when a priest from the house of Eli had come into the service, in fact, there were two priests, one from Aaron's family and one from Eli's family, and Solomon thrust him out of the ministry. 1 Kings 2:27, "So Solomon thrust out Abiathar." That was a co-high priest during the time of David and also Solomon, and Solomon got rid of him, that he might fulfill the word of the Lord which he spake concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh. The desecration of the house of the Lord resulted in a destruction of the house of Eli. I want to show you one more verse again that goes back to that point of contrast. The prophet told Eli these words, "I will raise me up. God will raise him up a faithful priest that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and in my mind, and I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever." Partly Zadok fulfills part of that, but don't you think that prophecy really points to none other than Jesus Christ, our great high priest? In the next chapter, you'll see Samuel speak this prophecy as coming to fulfillment directly to Eli. In chapter 4, when the Ark of the Covenant is taken by the Philistines, you'll see both of those sons killed. And at the news, Eli, at 98 at that point, being old and heavy, will fall back, break his neck, and die, after being 40 years a judge over Israel. But this promise of a faithful priest is prophetical, not only in the future near, but in the future far. Lord, help us who are in the ministry to be faithful, to be honorable ministers, that the people will never speak evil of our worship or of our most holy and righteous God. I pray the blessings of the Lord